The year is 1945. The world stands at a crossroads, its fate hanging in the balance. Across continents, the echoes of conflict reverberate, shaping the lives of millions. The world is weary, battered by years of relentless warfare, and yet, the outcome remains uncertain. The world is at war. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific, battles rage on. Cities tremble under the threat of air raids, and the skies are filled with the drone of bombers. Soldiers march through mud and ruin, driven by duty, fear, and hope for an end to the bloodshed. World War II has ravaged nations and devastated countless lives. Streets once filled with laughter now echo with the sounds of destruction. Families are torn apart and entire communities are reduced to rubble. The scars of war run deep, not just in the land but in the hearts of those who survive. In the Pacific, the Empire of Japan fights with unwavering ferocity. Japanese soldiers hardened by years of conflict dig in for what they believe will be a final, desperate defense of their homeland. The jungles and islands become battlegrounds, each inch of territory fiercely contested. The United States, facing a determined enemy, prepares for a final confrontation. American troops steel themselves for what lies ahead, knowing that the cost of victory may be staggering. Warships gather in the Pacific and generals strategize, aware that the next steps could shape the future of the world. But in this telling of history, a pivotal element is missing. The secret weapon, developed in the deserts of New Mexico, remains unused. The world stands on the brink, but the atomic bomb, capable of unimaginable destruction, never leaves its cradle. The atomic bombs destined for Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain unused. The cities, untouched by nuclear fire, continue to stand as they did before. The bombers, loaded with their devastating cargo, never received the order to unleash their power. The world holds its breath, unaware of how close it came to a new era of warfare. A shroud of questions hangs over this alternate reality. What decisions would leaders make, knowing that the ultimate weapon was never used? How would soldiers and civilians alike cope with the uncertainty of a war with no clear end in sight? The future is clouded, and the path forward is fraught with peril and possibility. How would the war have ended without the deployment of these devastating weapons? Would the Allies have launched a full-scale invasion of Japan, risking hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides? Would Japan have surrendered? Or would the conflict have dragged on, claiming even more victims? The choices made in this moment would echo for generations. What would have been the human cost? Without the atomic bomb, the war might have continued for months, or even years. More soldiers would have fallen in battle. More civilians would have suffered in bombed-out cities and refugee camps. The toll on humanity could have been even greater, with pain and loss stretching far beyond the battlefield. Let us step into this hypothetical scenario and explore the potential ramifications. By imagining a world where the atomic bomb was never used, we can better understand the weight of the decisions made in 1945 and the profound impact they had on the course of history. Join us as we journey through this alternate past, seeking answers to questions that still haunt our collective memory. Without the atomic bomb, the Allied strategy for ending the war in the Pacific took a dramatically different and far more perilous path. The fate of millions hung in the balance as military leaders turned to Operation Downfall, a plan that would become one of the most ambitious and potentially devastating military campaigns ever conceived. The stakes were enormous, and the risks almost unimaginable. This audacious plan called for a full-scale invasion and occupation of the Japanese home islands, a feat never before attempted in modern warfare. Allied commanders pored over maps and intelligence reports weighing every possible outcome. The Japanese homeland, fiercely defended and deeply entrenched, presented a formidable challenge. Every inch of ground would be contested, every city and village a potential battleground. Operation Downfall was divided into two massive, interconnected assaults, each larger than any previous amphibious operation in history. The scale of the undertaking was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen would be mobilized, supported by an unprecedented logistical effort. Supplies, vehicles, and equipment were amassed on a scale never before seen, as the Allies prepared for a campaign that could last months or even years. The first phase, Operation Olympic, was scheduled for November 1945. Its objective, to seize the southern island of Kyushu. This region was chosen for its strategic value, offering airfields and ports that would be vital for the next stage of the invasion. Allied planners anticipated fierce resistance as Japanese forces fortified the beaches and rugged terrain, preparing for a desperate last stand. The goal of Operation Olympic was to establish a secure foothold, a launching point for the main invasion force. Soldiers would have to fight their way ashore under withering fire, overcoming obstacles both natural and man-made. The cost in lives was expected to be staggering, with estimates of casualties running into the hundreds of thousands on both sides. Following Olympic, the Allies would launch Operation Coronet in March 1946. This second phase targeted the Kanto Plain, the heartland of Japan, and the gateway to Tokyo itself. The plan called for an even larger force to land on the beaches near the capital, pushing inland toward the seat of Japanese power. The fighting here was expected to be even more intense, as the defenders would be fighting for their homeland, their families, and their very survival. The sheer magnitude of these operations would have eclipsed even the legendary D-Day landings at Normandy. The number of troops, ships, and aircraft involved was unprecedented, and the logistical challenges were immense. Military planners knew that success would come at a terrible price, with the potential for massive casualties among both Allied forces and Japanese civilians. In total, over 6 million Allied troops, supported by a vast armada of warships, transports, and aircraft, would have converged on the shores of Japan. The world stood on the brink of a cataclysmic battle, one that could have reshaped history and left scars for generations to come. The projected casualties for Operation Downfall were staggering. American military planners braced for immense losses. Estimates ranged from 500,000 to over 1 million casualties. The fighting in Iwo Jima and Okinawa offered a grim preview of Japanese resistance. They were prepared to defend their homeland with unwavering resolve. Japanese civilians, heavily indoctrinated and armed, were expected to join the fight. This would have resulted in a bloodbath, with civilian casualties potentially reaching millions. The use of atomic bombs was not the only option considered by the Allies. Conventional bombing raids continued to devastate Japanese cities. A naval blockade cutting off vital supplies was already in effect. The Soviet Union's entry into the Pacific War loomed. Each of these strategies carried its own risks and uncertainties. Some officials advocated for a demonstration of atomic power, hoping to shock Japan into surrender. Others believed in pursuing diplomatic channels, seeking a negotiated peace. Within Japan, the leadership was, deeply divided. Hardliners within the military clung to the belief in ultimate victory. They saw surrender as an unthinkable dishonor. Others recognized the dire situation and, honestly, sought a way to end the bloodshed. The emperor himself, Emperor Hirohito, remained a remote figure. His influence on the course of the war was a subject of much debate. The lack of a decisive military defeat on Japanese soil made it difficult for peace advocates to gain traction. The potential use of atomic bombs weighed heavily on President Truman and his advisors. The sheer destructive power of these weapons was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Yet, the prospect of a protracted and bloody invasion presented its own moral dilemmas. The projected casualties on both sides were horrifying. The decision to use atomic bombs remains one of the most controversial in history. Without the use of atomic bombs, World War II might have continued for months or even years. The invasion of Japan would have been a grueling and costly campaign. The Soviet Union's advance into Manchuria and Korea would have reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Asia. The war's impact on China, already devastated by years of conflict, would have been even more severe. The world, still reeling from the horrors of war, would have faced a prolonged period of instability and uncertainty. The ultimate outcome of a protracted war without atomic bombs is difficult to predict. Japan, facing overwhelming odds and mounting losses, might have eventually surrendered. However, the terms of surrender could have been vastly different. The emperor's position, a point of contention in the actual surrender negotiations, might have been preserved. This could have had significant implications for Japan's post-war political development. The absence of the atomic bombings might have also influenced the course of the Cold War. The hypothetical scenario of a world without atomic bombs is one that continues to fascinate historians, scholars, and the general public alike. What if the Manhattan Project had never succeeded? Or if the bombs had never been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Would the war have ended differently, or would the world have found another way to bring about peace? These questions linger, haunting the corridors of history and fueling endless debates about morality, necessity, and the unpredictable consequences of scientific discovery. The absence of clear answers leaves us with more questions than we may ever be able to resolve. Each new generation of historians brings fresh perspectives, re-examining the evidence and challenging the narratives that have shaped our understanding of the war's end. The debates are not just academic, they touch on deeply personal and ethical issues that resonate to this day. The legacy of World War II, and particularly the use of atomic weapons, underscores the immense human cost of war. The devastation wrought upon cities, the suffering of civilians and soldiers alike, and the long-term effects of radiation are stark reminders of the price paid by millions. The images of ruined cities and shattered lives continue to evoke a sense of loss and sorrow, compelling us to reflect on the true cost of conflict. For the leaders of the time, the decisions they faced were agonizing. In war rooms and late-night meetings, military commanders and political leaders weighed the fate of nations, knowing that every choice carried profound consequences. The burden of responsibility was immense, and the moral dilemmas they confronted continue to be studied and debated by scholars and ethicists. The debate over the use of atomic bombs is far from settled. In classrooms, conferences, and public forums around the world, people continue to question whether the bombings were justified or if alternative paths to peace could have been pursued. Anti-nuclear movements and peace activists draw upon these debates to advocate for a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. The haunting images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of war. Survivors, known as hibakusha, have shared their stories for decades, bearing witness to the horrors they endured and urging the world never to forget. Their voices are a powerful testament to the need for compassion, understanding, and a commitment to peace. Across the globe, peace rallies and international conferences continue to call for nuclear disarmament and reconciliation. The release of doves, a universal symbol of hope, reflects humanity's enduring desire to move beyond the shadows of war and build a future founded on cooperation and mutual respect. Today, the world remains forever marked by the events of World War II. Cities like Hiroshima have transformed into symbols of resilience and peace, their memorials and remembrance sites serving as places of reflection for people of all ages and backgrounds. The lessons of the past are preserved not only in stone and steel, but in the hearts and minds of those who visit and remember. It is essential that we strive to learn from the past. Through education, storytelling, and acts of remembrance, we pass on the hard-won wisdom of previous generations. Veterans and survivors share their experiences with the young, ensuring that the realities of war are not forgotten and that the hope for peace endures. As the world gathers to commemorate, negotiate, and remember, we are reminded of our collective responsibility to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. The enduring debates and unanswered questions of the past are not just relics of history, they are calls to action, urging us to build a safer, more peaceful future for all.